So here it is, the ultimate Lumix photography showdown. How good is the GH6 in photography going into 2022? Now honestly, when you're looking at Micro Four Thirds, there's no better camera to really test the GH6 against other than the outgoing Lumix G9. Now when I say outgoing, basically what I'm saying is the G9 has been such a workhorse that's proven itself. So many years later, the G9 is still one of the leading Micro Four Thirds cameras, especially when it comes to stills. So welcome back to the channel, great to see your face over here. And if it's your first time, please consider subscribing. I have a ton of GH6 content coming out, which has already been filmed. We're just getting into editing it and lining it up because it takes a ton of effort to line up the GH5 with the GH6 and the GH6 with the GH5S and get all the right test footage to kind of show you if it's worthwhile investing in the GH6. Now we are going to get into some cool comparisons, including the 100 megapixel, some low light, and just so much more. Now this isn't going to be an extensive GH6 review. I am going to be making a GH6 review, but I think watching these kind of videos as they come out is pretty much going to give you a good idea anyway as what I think of the GH6. But at the end of this video, if you look in specifically at photography, I'm going to answer the question, the GH6 or the G9. So the first topic is low light. So starting off, I'm going to get straight to the point with low light and looking at the GH6 versus the G9. The G9 has only got 20 megapixels and the GH6 has got 25 megapixels. So it is a small sensor already. They've crammed a whole bunch more megapixels. So if you're looking at the PPI, it's gone up exponentially based on its size. So should the GH6 perform a lot better? Well, essentially no, but as technology moves on, smaller sensors are just getting better and better, so we are hoping that it's going to be better. So these test shots are under the night sky and the camera settings are all the same across all the cameras. I have got a shutter of 1/50, an aperture of f2.8, and this is shot on the Sigma 16mm f1.4 lens. So starting off at ISO 2500, moving up into ISO 4000, 6400, 8000, 10,000, 12,800, 16,000, and 20,000. Now before I get into comparing that directly with the Lumix G9, I just want to mention something here. I did switch into the high-res mode, which is 100 megapixels. So it takes like 8 megapixels, merges it, and comes out into this miraculous 100 megapixel image. But the funny thing is, in my testing, I couldn't go above ISO 1600. I'm not sure if this is going to change in a later update, but if you are shooting high-res mode, for some reason, I could only go up to ISO 1600. But if you're really looking at low light performance, you're not really going to be shooting at high ISOs anyway, and I'll talk about that later. So these are the two shots, and what's pretty cool is it gives you the 25 megapixel standard shot as well as the 100 megapixels, so doing a comparison is pretty cool. But what's crazy is, side by side, the 100 megapixel is not only sharper, obviously, but its low light performance is so much better. With some magic merging these raw images, it gives you a cleaner image with less grain. And that's quite insane. So the G9, the same shots, ISO 2500, ISO 4000, 6400, 8000, 10,000, 12,800, 16,000, and 20,000. And now this is a side-by-side split down the middle. Honestly, they seem initially quite close. However, when you start looking at the green grain and the white specks that are introduced much quicker, it's clear that the GH6 is a good few stops ahead. And it's when you look at the detail and the lines that the noise of the G9 starts to lose its clarity and sharpness. However, when cropping in at 300%, you can start to see how the GH6 magic is somehow so much cleaner than the G9. Yes, there's grain, but possibly due to that higher megapixel, as I mentioned, the noise is not only cleaner, but it's far more pleasing and it's structured. Now, this could just be due to the fact that it's a 25 megapixel sensor. So as soon as the 20 megapixel sensor starts to introduce a certain amount of noise, it starts to look a lot more pixelated as opposed to a higher megapixel camera. And this was seen something with the D800, that the grain from a higher megapixel camera, because it's a lot finer, can sometimes look better. Now, if you thought, well, great, you've given me some low light, but what happens if you don't shoot a lot in low light? I, for one, don't really go above ISO 3200 much, and that's why I've got your back. I shot both of these in the studio at pretty much low ISOs. So at a normal ISO in a control setting, the GH6 performs very similar. Now, sadly, the YouTube compression is probably not going to show this very well, but let's give it a shot. Now, the GH6 is considerably sharper based on the 5 megapixels that's extra. And you do see this on a much larger monitor that is very, very clear. But if you're going to be posting this to Instagram and that's kind of what you do, you're not really going to see much of a difference for that extra 5 megapixel. We're starting to split hairs when we start saying that an extra 5 megapixel makes it sharper. But if you're looking for that edge, the GH6 definitely has it. Now, as a full-time professional photographer and videographer, I can pretty much tell you that in my photography career, if I had to go above ISO 2500 for a paid professional shoot, I've probably added a lot more light. It's just due to the nature of the shoot that when you start pushing your ISO high up, you start to lose ambience as opposed to dragging your shutter, and this is why you introduce flash. And it's quite a technical kind of process if you're not into major like professional photography and you're just kind of the weekend warrior and you just, you know, shoot and lift your ISO and you're just looking for a pleasing image. It's very different, and this is why I don't really have to find a camera that shoots super high ISO when it comes to photography. But for the argument of this, I took an image at ISO 6400 on the GH6 and gave it a very, very small edit in terms of lifting the exposure and just bringing the noise down just a touch. If you bring the noise down too much, you lose sharpness. So there's this balance that you kind of have to find. And looking at these images side by side, you can see that the GH6 is fantastic. Even at ISO 6400, it's delivering a more than acceptable image that I think any professional photographer on a paid shoot is going to be using. Now, before you get into this, but Sony can shoot at a much higher ISO, and I'm going to drop a card over here on a video of micro four thirds versus full frame, and I'll put a link in the description too so you can watch it after this video, that I'd suggest you watch before you jump on the full frame micro four thirds bandwagon. High res mode. Now let's just start off by saying this is insane. The magic of this pixel shifting and no ghosting blows my mind. And it's one thing to put G9 on a tripod, and I'm not going to compare the two here for the G9 and the GH6 on a tripod, because honestly you're going to get very similar images. Even though one's 80 megapixel and one's 100 megapixel, that's not what we're getting into, because there you're really splitting hairs. However, because the GH6 delivers handheld high-res mode, we decided to push it a step further. And the question was, what if a client is looking for some massive high-res billboard image or window banner, whatever it may be, but can you develop a high-res image of a model, a product, makeup, I don't know, just something. I just wanted to play. So I got Michelle dressed up, put some continuous lights on, the Nanlite Forza 60B and some cool LEDs, and decided to shoot Michelle using high-res mode handheld in a just kind of normal setting in terms of a studio. Now, yes, when you do take a shot with high-res mode, it does kind of wait a little bit and you can see it like process the images together. So it's not a kind of spray kind of shooting where you can just go absolutely mad. But if you're looking for a specific shot like you would do on a professional set, and you just want that model to give you that exact look and shoot it and wait a few seconds and shoot until you get the desired look, this is amazing. Now, once again, as I said, the GH6 saves both the normal 25 megapixel and 100 megapixel image when you do the shot. But check this out. This is the high-res shot, and this is the normal shot. And yes, it's insanely sharp regardless. I mean, the GH6 delivers phenomenal images. But side by side, when you're really punching in, this is next level. Now I know a lot of people say, but you shouldn't have to zoom in at 600%. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but if you take an image and it's not exactly high res, like a 20 megapixel or a 15 megapixel image, and you put it on your screen, and then you take something like 40, 50, 60 megapixel and you put it on your screen, the one just looks insanely tack sharp. It almost looks like there's almost too much detail. And for me, the GH6 delivering 100 megapixel images in studio environment is mental. RAW. Now, as you know, Adobe launched the RAW capability so we can edit the GH6 shots in RAW. Now, there's one thing that a lot of people don't talk about, and that's that the GH5S was the first micro four thirds and only micro four thirds camera up until now that was developing 14-bit RAW as opposed to 12-bit RAW. Now, the GH6 develops 14-bit RAW. And you think to yourself, well, maybe that won't mean a lot. I'm going to show you something. Firstly, 12-bit is 68 billion colors, as opposed to 14-bit being 4 trillion colors. And that changes a lot. Before I get into the 14-bit and the 12-bit, I just want to show you something. The JPEG images that are coming out of the GH6 are way over-processed. This is a side-by-side GH6 JPEG versus RAW. You can't even see the pores on Michelle's skin in the JPEG. It's almost like the luminance is pushed up so high in the noise reduction, and it just kind of waters down that image, whereas the RAW image gives you this like really crisp, real look. And it's something that I noticed when I first got the GH6. I was quite shocked at how bad the JPEG quality was, and I just wanted to kind of edit the RAW. And now I've seen that if you're going to have a GH6, you should not be shooting JPEG at all. So back to this 12-bit, 14-bit. It's not going to make your image sharper, but what it is going to do is this. And the best time that you'll notice this is when you're really color correcting your images, or when some image is a little bit further from straight out of camera perfect than what it should have been. So to accentuate the difference in this, I took the luminance in Lightroom on orange and pulled it right down on the GH6. And then I did the same on the G9, pushing the bitrate of the image to a point where you wouldn't normally go. Now, if you're thinking to yourself, well, no one edits like that. It's not about the maxing out. It's about the fact that at 100% maxed out, the one does this and the other does that. So if you're playing it around that 20% mark, it just proves that the GH6 at 14-bit is so much cleaner. And this is something that I saw when I played with the GH5 photos at 12-bit as opposed to the Nikon D800, which is 14-bit. I could immediately see, as someone that edits a lot of skin tones and faces and skies at weddings, that this is something that really plays a vital role in getting the perfect shot. The results are crazy. I mean, if you look at this, the GH6 gives you amazing results, and the G9 gets a lower bit kind of blotchy look. And this is why your 14-bit DSLRs that we've seen for so many years had such good processing in editing. I then took it a bit further and took the same image in the G9, same settings, and the GH6, and edited the one and applied the same settings to the other image. Basically, pushed some of the shadows, pulled the highlights just to see how much dynamic range we have to work with and what kind of that 12-bit and 14-bit does. And the dynamic range and the shadows can be pushed so much further in the GH6 while still holding the highlights so much better. Take a look at how the G9 blows out her face, and the highlights can be pulled down more controlled on the GH6. The G9 grays out the whites while the GH6 continues to lower detail where it can be lowered while keeping the white or no data at that no data, whereas the G9 is just kind of graying it out. So yes, the 12-bit versus 14-bit makes a huge difference. Finally, autofocus. Now when it comes to photography, I for one pretty much use, spot focus. I lock my focus and I shoot the shot. I don't really use continuous running focus. I don't think something like the G9 or the GH6 was ever intended to be a professional sports camera. Otherwise, you're going for some form of Nikon Z9 or fancy Olympus sport mode camera. Now the G9 is exceptional when it comes to autofocus, but I wanted to use this in a little bit more of a, call it, real world test for me, and this may not suit you, but I think it will give you a very good idea. The only time I really use continuous autofocus is if I have someone walking towards me, whether it be a bride down the aisle or a model walking towards me. Otherwise, it's pretty much lock the focus, nail the focus, and get the shot. So I set the camera to AFS and I used the eye face detection, so it would just kind of look for the eye, and as you half press that focus button, it locks that focus and it just kind of holds it there. Whether the model moves backwards or forwards, it won't continuously follow that subject. Now the G9 is exceptional at this. Everyone knows the G9's had updates for the last 133 years, I think, which is quite a long time. And Panasonic still supports it. Now the GH6 still has to go through quite a stage of updates, and I can only imagine it's going to get better. But honestly, putting them side by side, looking at the GH6 performance and the G9, the performance was identical. And if I looked at my burst rate of shots that I took on the hit and the miss, honestly, I couldn't tell you which one was which. It was probably a 99% success rate on both. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed this kind of look at the GH6 versus the G9 in terms of photography. I am going to be comparing the GH6 low light versus the GH5S. Not exactly a fair test, but something that everyone wants to see, as well as the GH5 versus the GH6 in low light. And I think that's really going to kind of push the boundaries to where the GH6 really goes. I also got a full GH6 cinema rig build coming out, which I have already got a Samsung T7 drive. So I will be letting you know if that works as soon as the update drops. So make sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and let me know in the comments below, what do you think? Personally, I love the G9. I shoot with the G9 a lot, and if I'm going to a shoot and I'm taking the GH6 or the G9 and I'm not using some form of high-res mode and I'm just delivering, kind of the normal kind of images that everyone wants, the G9 in 2022 is still an exceptional camera. But unfortunately, the GH6 beats it in every single aspect. So that's it from me, wherever you are in the world. Have a good day, good evening, good night, goodbye.